Apple, of course, remains the story of the day. Hits an all-time high after beating on earnings on the heels of strong iPhone demand and services growth. Stocks up about 17% for the year. Market cap inching ever closer to a $1 trillion valuation. Let's bring in Jeff Kvaal this morning, IT hardware analyst over at Nomura Instinet, Will Power senior research analyst at RW Baird. Guys, good morning. Good to see you both.
Good morning, Carl. Thanks for having
me. Jeff, let's start with you. I mean, the overall narrative seems to be maybe don't count on a super cycle, but prices are making up for steady, less than absolutely stellar demand. And then, of course, services is propping up all of that from underneath. How do you see it?
Yes, I think that's a very fair assessment that Apple currently is tracking for the third or fourth consecutive year of flat iPhone unit volumes, but they've been able to do a very nice job in rebalancing the high end of the pricing tier so that they can get nice ASP increases. And certainly that caught us all by surprise this quarter.
Will, your take on not just the quarter, but also the guidance, revenue guidance for the current quarter, and how you see their pricing strategy shaping up for the next fiscal year?
Well, look, I mean, I think clearly hitting on all cylinders. I think that the real story was the iPhone ASP strength up almost 20% year over year, so a continuation of trends we've seen. And, of course, the fiscal Q4 guidance that looked rosy as well and could have allayed any concerns that might have existed on that front. I think points to, another upgrade cycle ahead of us. But look, the cherry on top of the sundae, I guess, so to speak, is I think the power of the ecosystem, which really shines through the services business. As you look at the metrics there, whether it's paid subscriptions, Apple Pay transactions, overall services growth of 28%, all of those are moving in the right direction, and we think that continues to power the stock from here.
I mean, Jeff, you think the stock goes higher as well. I'm looking at a price target from you. Actually, you're at 190, so maybe you're going to raise it. It's up 4.5%, so we've surpassed that price. Does Wall Street understand how to value this stock? Feels like every time there's a bearish narrative, Tim Cook comes back with a quarter that proves everybody wrong and shows that this enormous company can still grow revenues by double digits. How do you think about the valuation and whether Wall Street gets it?
Well, that's a good question. I guess as far as the narrative goes, one thing that we do need to keep in mind is that the ASP trajectory for next year may not be as rosy as it's been through the iPhone X cycle. I think that Apple did, as I mentioned before, a great job of setting a new price tier for iPhones with the iPhone X. From what we know about the impending cycle, it doesn't seem as though they're going to push that tier higher. Furthermore, from what we've gained and what we've seen with demand, it seems as though we may be on the cusp, on the upper end of elasticity here, and Apple may not be able to raise the price too much more. So I think we should be a little bit careful about extending that ASP increase trend into the future, and that would suggest that Apple's revenue growth would slow a little bit as we transition into the next product cycle.
And Will, we should point out, this is seasonally, historically, not their strongest quarter. Obviously, as we head into the fall, that's when a lot of these sales do take place. How do you model that seasonality with the threat of tariffs? How do you think tariffs would affect at least demand in Greater China?
Well, look, at least in this quarter, demand in Greater China, remained, remarkably resilient. Of course, we haven't seen impact, from tariffs at this point, and I guess that remains to be seen. There's no question that's a risk in a wild card on multiple fronts, both with respect to adoption within China, but also potential, shipments to U.S. and what it could mean there. And so, I guess our hope is that, cooler minds, prevail, and we don't see that as an impact. And I think investors are a little less focused on that, but, obviously something to pay attention to. It only takes a tweet or two, apparently.
On the trade front, Jeff, which is the bigger risk for Apple's profitability and sales? Is it on the consumer demand in China, the great exposure, the fact that it's still growing double digits and that's at risk, or is it on the production supply side? And if we start to see these tariffs go through, it's a company that makes its iPhones in China.
Well, I'm not sure, to be honest, Zara, that's a question that is easily answered because there seems to be an awful lot of volatility from week to week about what the tariff structures might look like, and certainly there's tit for tat. So I may respectfully dodge that question a little bit, and I guess maybe I will retreat to saying that both the US and China have a vested interest in keeping the iPhone production volumes high, and not interfering with that trade. Certainly, obviously, we all love our phones here, and in China there are millions of people that are either directly or indirectly affected by iPhone production.
Hey, Will, if I told you I had an independent company, services business, posted $9.5 billion in revenues, growing 31% year over year, what kind of multiple would you put on it?
Yeah, hey David, that's a good question, right? I mean, it's I guess you're going to look at some of the big cap, higher growth, internet names, whether it's the Facebook's, which is obviously down from recent highs, or Alibaba, or Google, but you get to at least a mid-single-digit type revenue multiple, and potentially something north of that. And that's a business that again is approaching $40 billion now on an annualized basis, quickly getting to $50 billion. And I think what I'd really punctuate that point is we think there's still upside opportunities there. Tim Cook alluded to this on the call last night, but we think a streaming content product is finally going to hit the market sometime in 2019. And of course, you've got opportunities on top of that to capitalize on that huge paid subscriber base.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they'll use Apple TV, I guess, potentially as the distribution mechanism overall for a streaming product. You think that will sort of be across the board and compete with the likes of the others that are out there, I guess, right?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, certainly that'll be the most seamless fit, just as Apple Music works probably best, on HomePod today. Ideally, it would be available across, other platforms as well, and I assume it would be when all is said and done. But we think that's a significant opportunity from them, and of course, they've made a number of announcements with respect to content hires, and we think that finally starts to manifest itself at some point, we hope, in 2019.
Finally, Jeff, the gross margins led some to believe that they're not going to have to cut prices in order to chase units. At the same time, Huawei takes over from Apple as for the first time as the second biggest phone maker after Samsung. I just wonder whether you think they need to cater more to the low end, or can they sort of survive here at this upper atmosphere?
Well, let me first make an observation on the prior question. I think we should be careful not to value Apple services business as wholly independently of their unit business, because obviously it is people who onboard into the Apple ecosystem through new device sales or upgrade to the latest devices that are the ones that fuel, in part, the services growth. So the two things are not wholly independent. So let's be careful about that. As far as a lower end phone for Apple goes, yes, I do think that that's important. Apple's unit volumes have been flattish for a number of years now, despite growth in the smartphone ecosystem. Our analysis of what's happening is that people who leave their feature phone, say in India, for example, will migrate first to an Android phone, and then some of those will ultimately come over to the Apple ecosystem. I think it would be nice if Apple were able to capture some of those phones earlier on, and therefore be able to grow its unit volumes, and therefore grow its ecosystem a little bit more quickly than it has been.